history books left this part out. Let me fix that. In the year 40 AD, the most powerful man in the known world, the ruler of Rome, master of a 50 million person empire, commander of the greatest military force on earth, called a meeting of the Roman Senate. Important men in togas gathered. The Senate was full. Everyone was quiet. And Caligula, Emperor Gaius Julius Caesar, Germanicus, stood up and announced that he intended to make his horse a government official. Not a joke, not a metaphor, his actual horse, named Incitatus, the one with a marble stable, a personal chef, and an ivory feeding trough. That horse? Consul of Rome? Crew now. There are two ways to interpret this story. The first way, the obvious way, is that Caligula was completely, irreversibly, off-charts insane. The second way is somehow more disturbing. Stay with me. Before Caligula became Caligula, the name synonymous with absolute power and absolute madness, he was actually a pretty normal kid. Born in 12 AD, his father was Germanicus, one of the most beloved generals in Roman history. They nicknamed him Caligula, which means little boot, because as a toddler, he'd run around camp in tiny military sandals. Little boot. The soldiers thought it was adorable. They had no idea. Then things went wrong. His father died mysteriously when Caligula was 7. His mother was exiled and eventually starved to death. 2 of his brothers were executed or imprisoned by the Emperor Tiberius. Caligula survived by keeping his mouth shut and pretending to be completely harmless. For years, under an emperor who killed most of his own family. When Tiberius finally died in 37 AD, the circumstances of which are, let's say, suspicious, Caligula became emperor at 24 years old. Rome was thrilled. The people loved him. They called him their star, their baby, their little chicken. Yes, they actually called him that. The Romans were very weird. For the first 6 months, Caligula was by all accounts a genuinely good emperor. He freed political prisoners. He cut taxes. He put on spectacular shows. He was generous and popular and everything Rome had hoped for. And then he got sick. Nobody knows exactly what it was. A fever, some kind of brain illness. Maybe the cumulative trauma of watching his family get systematically murdered finally caught up with him. Whatever it was, Caligula went into his bedroom in October of 37 AD, seeming like a reasonable emperor. He came out as something else entirely. Let's talk about what Caligula did after the illness. Because the horse story, wild as it is actually not the most insane thing on the list. Not even close. He started by declaring himself a living god. Not metaphorically. Caligula went to the temples of other gods and demanded to share them. He had a statue of himself placed in the temple of Jupiter and demanded the priests bow to him. He would dress up as different gods. Mercury, Venus, sometimes Hercules. He'd show up to Senate meetings in full divine regalia and just sit there, expecting people to act normal. Caligula would sometimes have people executed during dinner parties. Just mid-meal guards would come in, somebody would be dragged out. Everyone else would continue eating. Plate. He once reportedly said to his wife and friends at a dinner, "I could have both your throats cut any time I liked," then laughed. Then kept eating. He bankrupted the Roman treasury with his parties and spectacles, then taxed basically everything to refill it. Lawyers, porters, servants, prostitutes, all taxed. He reportedly stood at the dock and taxed food being unloaded from ships. By the peace,
the conflict was absolutely massive. He declared war on the ocean.
Charged his legions to the English Channel, lined them up on the beach, and declared victory over Neptune. Then ordered his soldiers to collect seashells as trophies of their victory. Against the sea, Cainite, when this was reported to them, gave Caligula a triumph. a victory parade. For this campaign, because that's what you do when the man with the armies says he won.
And now we get to the horse.
Incitatus, the name means swift, or at full gallop in Latin, was Caligula's favorite racehorse. And Caligula loved this horse in a way that would make most modern horse owners look under. Incitatus had a marble stable, not wooden, marble. He ate from an ivory manger. He slept under purple blankets, the color reserved for emperors. He wore a collar of precious stones. He had his own house, a villa. He had a household of slaves dedicated entirely to his personal care. He was served oats mixed with gold flakes, because apparently that's a thing. Caligula issued orders that silence be maintained in the neighborhood around the stable the night before any race, so Incitatus could get adequate sleep enforced by soldiers. Caligula also had dinner parties hosted in the horse's name. Real dinner parties, with real guests who ate real food, while the horse presumably stood there being a horse. And then Caligula announced in the Senate that he intended to make Incitatus a consul. The consulship, one of the two highest offices in the Roman state, an office held by generals, statesmen, and the greatest minds of Roman civilization. Now, here's where we need to stop and be historically honest for a second. The historical sources, Suetonius and Cassius Dio, both report that Caligula intended to make Incitatus consul. Neither claims it actually happened. It was announced, never formally enacted. Incitatus was also apparently made a priest in Caligula's imperial cult, which did happen, according to Cassius Dio. So the horse did technically hold a religious office. The horse was a priest. Let's just sit with that. Consulship traced its roots back 500 years to the founding of the Republic, an office held by generals, statesmen, and the greatest minds of Roman civilization. Caligula wanted to give it to his horse. Okay, here's where this story gets genuinely interesting. Because there's a historian named Aloys Winterling who wrote a full biography of Caligula in 2011. And his argument, which is compelling and kind of horrifying, is that Caligula wasn't insane. Winterling's argument is that Caligula understood exactly what he was doing. He was a man who had watched for years as an entire ruling class performed elaborate rituals of respect and loyalty for emperors they privately despised. So when Caligula got power, real, absolute, unchallengeable power, he started playing games. He'd do something outrageous, and the Senate would bow and clap and smile every single time. By threatening to make Incitatus consul, Caligula was making a point with spectacular efficiency that the Senate's dignity, their traditions, their precious offices were worth nothing. He could give the consulship to a horse and they would accept it. He knew they would, because they always did. Cars wasn't a sign of madness, it was a message. The most expensive, most insulting, most horse-shaped message in the history of political commentary. Kant in the Senate understood it perfectly, and smiled and applauded anyway, because what else could they do? Of course, this doesn't mean Caligula wasn't also extremely, dangerously unhinged in various other ways. The seashells were real, the executions were real. He could be both, and he was. The reign of Caligula lasted 3 years, 10 months, and 8 days. On January 24th, 41 AD, a group of Praetorian Guard officers ambushed him in a passageway under his palace and stabbed him approximately 30 times.
30 times. They really wanted to make sure.
Uncle Claudius, who had been hiding behind a curtain when he heard the commotion, was found and declared emperor. As for Incitatus, unknown. The sources don't tell us. He presumably went back to being a regular horse, the most well-housed, gold-teating former government priest horse in Roman history, but still just a horse. Oh, what do we take from the story of Caligula and his horse? 1. Absolute power does things to people that aren't always pretty or coherent. 2. An institution too afraid to say no becomes functionally meaningless. 3. If you give someone a marble stable and gold oats, they're going to expect the consulship eventually. The thing I keep coming back to is those senators. Sitting in their togas, watching Caligula threaten to make a horse their colleague, and deciding that the correct response was to nod and write it down in the minutes, and go home for dinner. 37 stab wounds later, the nodding stopped. Bear, if your brain is somewhere between disturbed and amused, same. Leave a comment. What's the single weirdest thing Caligula did? The horse, the seashells. Declaring himself a god, the dinner parties. I genuinely want to know which one breaks you the most.